So welcome everybody to Texas AEL Manager Monday. Our topic today is employee search and interviewing skills for administrators. Our presenter today is Dr. Danny Lovett, and he is with Education Service Center Region 5. So we thank him very much for joining us and for tuning in, taking the time out of his busy schedule. And my name is Olga Escamilla, and I also have Beth Ponder here, and we will be facilitating the session for today. And without further ado, I want to introduce or welcome our presenter, Dr. Danny Lovett. So Danny was born in Oklahoma, and he received his bachelor's degree from Oklahoma State University. He earned his master's in school administration and a doctorate in educational leadership from Stephen F. Austin State University. He's taught science, coached, been an assistant principal, curriculum director, and a superintendent of schools in Jasper, Burkeville, Avondale, and High Island. So 18 years ago, he was blessed to be hired by Region 5 Education Service Center, where he currently serves as executive director. I think that is awesome. So in addition to the day-to-day operation of Region 5, his duties include conducting around 50 workshops per year for school boards, faculty, and administrative teams. And he also conducts superintendent searches and has served as an adjunct professor at Lamar University. So welcome, Dr. Lovett. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and take it away.
Thank you, Olga. A couple of things I wanted to say real quick in regard to this presentation today. First of all, I am honored and very fortunate to get to work with Brenda Schofield. And the Region 5 Adult Ed program has been a showpiece of the Service Center for over 30 years. And we've been blessed to have Brenda as our leader in that program she started when she was 5 years old, I think. So she's been there also for 30 plus years. So love working with Brenda. She's the reason I'm here today. She was kind enough to ask me if I'd be interested in doing this. And the answer was yes. Interviewing and hiring people is one of the things I really like to talk about. We have done mid-30s, 34, 35 superintendent searches for schools in the area. I've done this presentation for years for different school districts because if you're like me and you think that who you hire is the most important thing you do for your organization, then hopefully this will be something that everybody will benefit today. I've reached the age where I put reading glasses on and off at times. So if you see me swapping in and out, it's just as I navigate the presentation and the screen. Okay, so here we go, everybody. Again, I encourage you to put questions in the chat. I mean for this to be very interactive. I want to answer any questions you have, and I also want to have some fun with this today. I think it's an incredibly important topic, but like everything else, I think we all learn better when we are having some fun while we go through it. So let's jump in and let's start with this question. So the question of the day, as an executive or mid-level administrator after your first 6 months on the job, what's the most important thing you do for the rest of your tenure at that school or organization? Olga, what kind of answers do we have coming in? Are they shy or are they going to jump in?
They may just jump in. It's just going to take them a little bit to type. So we have to have some good wait time.
No worries. So again, I'll go ahead and start the first part of this. I asked you after the first 6 months on the job. So what do I feel about the first 6 months? I think when you're hired as a leader, whether you came from inside the organization you're leading or you came from the outside, I think during your first 6 months, you've got to let everyone know what culture is going to be. I think everybody needs to know what your expectations and goals are for the organization. I also think you need to move slowly for a bit and you need to observe. You need to just get to every campus or every office. You need to observe. You need to get some ideas about what's going well, what needs to go better. And all of those things, it depends on whether you are coming from inside or you're coming from outside, how long that might take. But just giving you time to type questions, that's what I think your main job is the first 6 months on the job. So Olga, I see that we have some things in the chat.
We
So what
did.
are our answers?
So Minnie Jenkins says self-examination.
Good.
And Dr. Frankie Johnson says set expectations and check them regularly.
Yep, I would put that in that first 6 months. Keep going.
That's all I have for now.
Okay, so all of those are good. And everyone, I'm not here to tell you what to do today. I'm here to give you some things to think about. I believe after the first 6 months on the job, the only thing that really matters from that point on is who you hire. We talk a lot about this at Region 5. We talk a lot about this with schools. Now, don't get me wrong. I understand you're sitting there thinking, well, when I took the job as leader, I didn't get to fire everybody and name my own staff, and that's true. So there's lots of challenges involved with integrating the staff you inherited. But I think moving forward, if you're going to be there for a significant amount of time, there's nothing more important than who you hire, because my idea of great leadership is you're only as good as the people who work with you. So that's our lead into this. So if any of you share my belief that what really matters is who you hire, then what we're talking about today becomes pretty important. So let's jump in and let's talk about interviewing skills and how to go about hiring the best people to make you the best organization you can possibly be. So where are we going to start at? I think that people often don't put enough thought into what they need. So what do I mean by that? I think a lot of times before you ever post a job, you need to ask yourself, when you have an opening, is our perfect person already here? In other words, as you see on the screen, I'm not going to read to you today. I'm just going to use these for talking points. But I think a lot of times people pull that trigger and they think, well, we got to post a job. We got to look outside. Well, I think sometimes you need to look inside first. And you may be in an organization where legally you're required to post every job that comes open, or you may not. But nonetheless, I always think it's worth the time to look inside and simply ask yourself, can we shuffle the personnel we already have and improve? And I put "and improve" in bold because you know what? If you can't improve, then you definitely need to look and post the job and look outside. And then I think you need to be proactive and intentional in what you're looking for. I think, notice it says best case scenario. You look at the job that as it exists now when someone leaves, and before you post or fill that job, can you tweak that job, or are there qualifications you can look for that would make that job more effective than it was with the person you had before? This is an underthought ability or an underthought skill for making an organization better with who you hire, is looking at, can we tweak this job and look for someone with a skill set in addition to what we would have said the minimum skills were, and make that position even more effective. Obviously, everybody knows you've got to have minimum acceptable qualifications. That's usually as simple as your job posting or your job description. And then here's what we really work hard on at Region 5. And I think a lot of people don't do this. And I think a lot of times when people do, they aren't as specific as they should be. We actually develop an ideal employee profile. And we don't do that for the service center as a whole. We do that for every department. Matter of fact, we did this at a staff day. We updated it at a staff day last week. And one of the things we do is every department in our organization has an ideal employee profile. It's developed by the people in that department, and it's actually posted somewhere in their department, and it's there all the time. It's where everybody can see it every day. That does several things for us, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But then the last thing you see on this slide is, I think you have to have a timeline. So this is a lot of hoops I think you need to jump through before you even post a job that I think sometimes are overlooked. I think a job comes open, we just call HR, we tell HR, here's the position, where's the job description, let's post that. And I think these are all things that are worthwhile to do as you start the process. Let's talk real quickly about where do we post. And that can be unique. I understand I'm not just talking to school people today. I was looking as you came online. So where you post your job kind of depends on your organization, what type it is. If you're talking about an educational organization, we're all required to post inside somewhere. So we've all got either a job bulletin board, or more likely today, we've got it on our website. And then where do you look? Well, you can post your job at a lot of universities will allow you to do that. The education service centers around the state, if you're an education entity, most of us have job boards that we allow all of our schools to post on. tons of online, correct? Nowadays, lots of the different online Monster and all those things where you can post openings. I don't know if anybody still posts in a newspaper, but depending on where you're located, if you're in an urban area and you have a newspaper with a job listings, certainly you can do that, or any of the job boards. So again, if you want to throw anything in the chat, any suggestions that I left out, that'd be awesome as well. And then who else can you call to look for candidates? Well, if it's something that requires a college degree, make sure the university's in your area. You have a relationship with them, so you know, or you can just call them and say, hey, do you have any recent graduates? Region 5, we actually have a teacher certification program, a principal certification program, so our schools will call us. And then your personal network. As an organizational leader, all of you should have a personal network of people that do what you do in other organizations, and that network is always great to reach out to. All of these things are efforts we do to make sure we get the best applicants we can get for these positions. And then what about job fairs? Man, there was a time that job fairs were the best way to go. I think they still have some relevance depending on your organization. And certainly job fairs are something you can look at as well. And Olga, I'm gonna ask you one more thing to put in the chat. All of these things we do before we post, do any of you have some unique ideas you'd like to share? Olga, anything in there?
We did have a response from your earlier question when we first started from Angela. And Angela said to execute a leadership style that will prove to be successful in increasing productivity.
Awesome. I think that's great. And by the way, that's another, not one of the things I'll talk a lot about today, but one of the things we love to do is leadership styles. We love to talk about different leadership styles. We also love things like Myers-Briggs profiles to help people understand different leadership styles. So I think that's very valuable also. Okay, I'm going to jump to the next slide. If anybody, just like we did just then, if you have a question or a comment, you type it in. When I check back with Olga, we're going to read everything. So you've decided, okay, we're prepared. We know what we want. We've got that ideal employee profile. We're posting our job. What's next? Well, people are hopefully going to start applying, and hopefully you're going to get some great applications. So what do you look for in a resume? Well, again, I think to be proactive in your job posting, I think the way you ask for things will generate a better resume or information or vita when you get it. So let's talk about this. What to ask for on a resume when you post a job. I think you should give them an idea of what kind of resume you're looking for, what kind of format you want it in, presentation, length, specifically, what do we want to see in there? We do this when we post jobs, when we do a superintendent search. And notice what I put in parentheses. We're all computer-based nowadays, and all of our HR, most of our HR offices within our organizations, we have an online resume that people fill out. I'm going to be quite honest with you. I think most of those are worthless. I mean, I understand we got to have them, but they don't tell me much when I'm going through a list of applicants to try and pick out the best person to interview, because a lot of those online general applications, they just don't give me the information I need. And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you most of them just annoy me if I was the person actually wanting to interview for a job or apply for a job. So we ask for specific outside, particularly again, when we're doing a superintendent search, an executive level search. Paper versus electronic. Most people today are going to tell you, hey, we want to send that in electronic. It shows we're smart and we're techie. And when we do superintendent searches, you guys, we ask for paper applications. We call them hard copy application packets. And we have very specific reasons we do that. And that's because when I'm working with a school board, I tell them it's your first chance to see a quality of work. And I love to see a paper application because it's a glimpse at a quality of work. It's the quality of the paper that's kind of old school, but I'm old, so maybe that's why I still like it. It's presentation, it's quality of paper, it's, if I ask for online applications, I then go back to a school board with a whole bunch of 9 by 11 and a half staple at the top, and everybody's resume looks just alike. I think it's not only an advantage for me to see a paper application where they can have some creativity, I think it's an advantage for the applicants themselves to show that they have some differences. Personal information for certification. You definitely need that in there. What kind of personal information is vital for and certification for our position? And then degrees, certificates held, all degrees, then relevant certifications, and anything else that kind of goes with the job. This really changes when we're looking for entry level. In other words, people who are usually young and inexperienced, they don't have a lot of this. But if you're looking at an upper level position, and if you don't give some structure to this, they'll just send you so much stuff. It's almost unmanageable. I'm talking about veteran people with a lot of work history. So again, be specific about asking what you want to see for the position you're hiring. So what other things would we put in there? Educational history, especially if you're a university or a school, you want to see that educational history. You should always ask for these things in reverse chronology. In other words, most recent to most distant in time. If you don't ask for it that way, you're going to get them and they'll be all over the place. So be sure you're specific about how you want that to come. And then work history, again, in reverse chronology. And then red flags we're looking for, gaps or demotions in that history. And then references. It's interesting. A lot of people will tell you different things about references. I'll tell you, we usually ask for 8. Do that for a reason. I'm never going to call 8 references. I typically call 4. But by asking for 8, it gives me a range of references I'm looking for. Make sure you ask for cell phones in today's world. And I'll usually call 2 or 3 of the ones they list, and I'll call a couple they didn't list. But it's always interesting to me to see who they send as references. Notice another red flag there is if their immediate supervisor isn't listed, unless you specifically have a reason they didn't list it because they don't want people to know they're applying. That's definitely a red flag. The other thing is, are they giving you references that are logical to the position they're applying for? For example, I did a superintendent search one time. I got 8 references, and 5 of the references were clergy. And I talked to the guy later because I kind of do some counseling on these things after the fact. And I said, I appreciate the references, but I was hiring you to be a school person, not hiring you to be a preacher. So you really might think about most of your references being related. Having 1 or 2 references in there that are sort of a character reference, that's not a bad thing. But again, I glean a lot of information simply by who they list as references. One more thing before I leave this. Notice I said the worth of reference letters. I'll be honest with you. I think reference letters are absolutely worthless. I don't know why people ask for them anymore. You may scratch your head because I know that's kind of a traditional classic thing, but you know what? Anybody who's dumb enough to give me a written reference that's not awesome, I'm not going to interview them anyway. So I don't know that there's any value to reference letters, and I'll bet a lot of you still require that. I think you ought to rethink it, because another thing I'm going to talk about today is we want to make, in the age of shortages, we want to make the process of applying as easy as possible to get the most applicants. And I just honestly, I don't know the worth of reference letters, and a lot of you may be disagreeing with me on that. But again, my job is not to tell you what to do. It's just to give you some things to think about. So what else? Transcripts. Again, one of the things I've always thought was kind of strange is the difficulty of getting an official transcript. I'm telling you, as a guy with multiple degrees from multiple universities, it's an act of Congress to get an official transcript, especially if I haven't applied for a job in a while and I need official transcripts. It's a lot of trouble to get those. Sometimes it takes a while. It costs money. And again, I'm all about getting as many people to apply as possible. We don't ask for official. Unofficial transcripts are fine. And there's a lot more that goes into hiring than just the transcript, and certainly a lot more than just the GPA. But again, something to think about. are you willing to lose an applicant because of all the difficulty in getting an official transcript? Up to you. What other things go into an application packet? Now I'm talking about a formal one, not just a quickie online that your HR department sends out. So cover letter. When I do workshops with people who are applying for jobs, because I do this exact workshop flipped to the other way, I always tell them 1 page on your cover letter, no more than that. I've seen cover letters that are 5 pages long. The problem with that is if the job is worth having, I'm going to get 30 or 40 applicants. And if you don't catch me in the first page of your cover letter, you're not catching me, because I'm probably not going to read more than that anyway. So I think every good resume has a cover letter. And to me, it's almost a red flag if that thing's five pages long. So I think 1 good page and front loading all the vital information is important. Again, depending on what organization you're in, if you're an upper level administrative job in education, people are going to put stuff in that resume like their personal philosophy, a portfolio, all kinds of things that you may or may not want to see. So when you post your job, I think you make a very specific posting with the things you want on that resume. And if they want to add all that other stuff, hopefully they'll do it at the end, so you're not trapped going through 50, 30 or 40 or 50 resumes, have to look at a bunch of stuff you don't care about. Grammar and typos, all I have to say about that, in the age of spell check, if you're getting cover letter or resume with a lot of grammar and typos, wow, I'd just probably throw that in the trash to start with, because I don't know what to say about people that don't have spell check on their computer. So that's a lot of thoughts about resumes and what to ask for. Olga, do we have any questions or comments? I see we've got a few more things in the chat, although I can't see what they are. So fill me in.
So we have a comment from Beth Ponder, and she says, for us, in terms of the resume, she said, we and the application, they have to complete the electronic form, but ask them to upload an actual resume.
Yeah. And again, we do too. So I'm not being holier than thou. And again, I think we all would be better served to figure out a way not to do that. Asking applicants to double dip things. Again, we're in an age of shortage, particularly in the education world. I want to make this process as easy as possible while getting what I want. But Beth, we're just like you. My HR has a completely worthless thing we ask everybody to fill out because somewhere it's in policy, I guess. But as an executive director, that's kind of one of my pet peeves, but we do it too. All right, so we've got our resumes are pouring in now. Hopefully we're getting some good applicants. So what do we do as we prepare to choose who we're going to interview? How do we get the scoop on whether or not we want to interview these people? Well, in our world, it starts with, are they actually certified? And one of the things I do for schools when I'm doing a superintendent search is I check everybody's certification with State Board of Educator certification, make sure they actually are certified for what they say they're certified for. That's easy. The SBEC website's easy to navigate, doesn't take much time at all. In your organization, you may have the same kind of thing or you may not. And then Google, man, Google is incredible for weeding out bad applicants. And it takes some skill, because we all know that Google, just because it's on Google doesn't mean it's the truth, right? Everything on the internet's absolutely true. Well, we probably know that's not right, but Google is a wonderful thing. And again, one of the funniest things I love to do when I'm doing this workshop, the opposite side of this workshop, when I'm doing this workshop for people who are applying for jobs, especially young people, I always tell them, you need to Google yourself and you need to go back and clean up your online profile, because if you have what was the one everybody used to do? Oh my gosh, MySpace. If you have an old MySpace account where you referred to yourself as the mistress of anarchy, then you might want to go back and clean up your electronic footprint, because if you apply for a job with me, I promise you, I'm going to Google your name and everybody else is too. So I think between Google and Facebook, I think, believe it or not, actually, personal opinion here, one of the few positive things about Facebook is you can at least go back and check on people when they apply. Let's see, your network. I think all great leaders have a great network of people that do what they do in different organizations that are like theirs. I think absolutely when you're narrowing your list down and getting down close to the group you are going to interview, calling people in your network to check and see, what they know, have they interviewed them? Are they awesome? Are there red flags out there? I think checking with your network is incredibly smart and efficient. If you're wondering what TAPER is, that's a school specific thing, but it's a performance report about all the schools across the state. So if I'm going to hire an administrator from a school and I'm worried about their ability to do curriculum or something, I'll go to their school and I'll look at their TAPER and I'll see, is that school doing great in the areas I'm looking for? So I just threw that out there. I know that's education specific, but you may have something in your job or your career that is similar. So I think if you have a way with all the tools we have and our resources we have electronically to go look at the performance of the organization they're coming from, I think it's good to know, are they coming to you from a great organization or are they coming to you from an organization that's struggling? Notice what I put in parentheses there also. This can give you some good interview questions when you look at the performance of the organization they're coming to you from. And then their immediate supervisor, in the school business, this may be their principal, but whatever business you're in, I think getting information from their previous supervisor and the confidentiality there to the ability you can or cannot get actual relevant, true data about individuals, comes down to the whole passing the trash thing versus what's left unsaid. A lot of times when I'm calling someone for reference, I get just as much, and you do too, I get just as much out of what they don't say as what they do. So I think all of that is important as we're going through. And notice in this instance, I am checking references before I choose who I'm going to interview. There are also often situations where we actually interview and then check references before we hire. I think if you can check references, at least a couple before you pick who you're interviewing, I think if you have that ability, I think it's worthwhile. And then when I say, what about asking people who are there? Remember, I told you earlier, I love to check references they didn't list. So if I know someone or I have a good idea about the organization or school they came from, if I know someone there, I may call and say, hey, what about this person? Even if I don't know someone there. I was laughing the other day. Someone asked me, they said, well, who would you call if you didn't know anyone there? I said, well, if it's a school, I'm going to call the school secretary, the campus secretary. They typically love the school. They typically know more than most of the administrators anyway. That's almost a joke, but it might also be true. And I love to call school secretaries and just say, hey, so-and-so works at your school. They're applying for a job. What do you think? And I'll tell you something else. School secretaries usually tell you the truth. But whether it's a school or whether it's another organization, I think there's value in trying to call those places and see what they think about someone. What other ways to get the scoop before we choose who we're going to interview? What can you ask? Well, it depends. To be quite honest, it depends on who you're calling. If you're calling someone you don't know, I typically have a standard set of questions that I ask references. I ask them all the same, but I also ask them to elaborate. I will often say when I call for a reference, I'll say, I am calling you for a reference on Brenda Schofield. And if it's Brenda, they're going to say, just hire her. She's awesome. If you call me, that's what I'll tell you, although I wouldn't want you to hire her because I don't want her to leave. But I digress. I will often, when I call a reference, say, hey, I'm calling for reference on Brenda, and I have a set of questions I can ask, or if you'd like, you can just tell me what you want me to know. And I'll tell you 9 times out of 10, if it's going to be a great reference, I'll never get to the questions I'm going to ask because they'll say, oh, yeah, let me tell you about Brenda. She's awesome. So I think there's some value in that. I think you have standard questions, but personally, I like to give them the opportunity to just talk about the person. And most of the time, if they really like that person, you don't have to push them too hard. You see what else? There are a few things you can't ask. I think most of us are aware what those are. Can't ask personal things, can't ask marriage, you can't ask, politics, things like that, not appropriate, health related. Again, I think you write down your questions. I think they're open-ended is better. Run them by somebody else to see if you're forgetting anything, and take notes. You absolutely need to take notes when you're talking to a reference. And everybody refers to this as the magic question because it's the one thing you can ask, and we all know what that is, right? If you had the opportunity, would you hire them again? You guys, if I'm having to ask somebody that, the reference is already bad enough that I don't need to ask that. Because I'm telling you, and I often tell school boards, if I call 4 or 5 references and at least one of them doesn't tell me they're a superstar and I'm stupid if I don't hire them, I don't have a good reference, because I am looking for references that are going to tell me the exact same things I would say about Brenda if someone called me for a reference on her. I get real antsy, and I love and I laugh at the fact that everybody tells me, well, the magic question is, and I'm like, really? If you need to ask that question, yeah, you've already got a bad reference. So any thoughts on that? I'm passionate enough about that. I'd love to know if there are any thoughts on that. Because I can't tell you, my whole career, people say, well, that's the magic question that'll make or break a reference. I'm like, no. Olga, anybody want to chime in on that one?
We had a comment from Sophia, but I think she was just going back to
That's okay.
about the application. She said they do the same electronic application on the district page, and then they can upload their resume. And she said many applicants don't. So
yeah. And see, again, thank you for reading that. So that tells me either one of two things. That tells me I've made it onerous enough that I may be losing a good applicant, or that tells me that applicant's probably lazy and they're probably applying for 40 other jobs and they don't have time to do that for my job. So I can't find a positive to doing both.
do you think it could also be that they don't have those technical skills, and that might be another reason why you would just pass them by, because they don't have those skills?
Exactly. That would be a red flag. Yeah, you're exactly right. That would be a red flag in most of the positions I would have. And if it's a position, and real quick, hold that thought, don't forget, if it is a position that doesn't require technical skills, then I need to be taking that into consideration as I go through the process. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So the other thought is that and I can recall this from when I worked at a service center, we were told that if we received a call about a reference, that all we could do was refer them to HR, and we could not respond to any questions.
Yeah. Let's just go with that. If you can't tell, I'm like, yeah, fine. I've heard people say those things. Again, I'm gonna have some HR person hating on me in the chat, but nobody's ever shown me that law. Where is that law? It's not a Region 5 policy that we've developed ourselves. So I have heard a lot of things over the years that you can, you can't. I'm like, why? And I think sometimes if hiring is the most important thing we do, I think we need to get outside some of these antiquated things about how we hire. And if it doesn't make sense, at least ask why and get a reason why you can't. And don't get me wrong, I've probably got HR people on the call going, well, Danny, there really are reasons. And so, it is what it is.
Okay. And Mike Jenkins said, yes, I've been told that also. So one of the other things that they did tell us is that the only thing we could provide was, yes, that individual did work here. They work here from X date to X date. And that's all I could say.
And how worthless is that, right? So now do you see why sometimes, no, not sometimes, all the time, I will try to find somebody they didn't list as a reference, and somebody who maybe doesn't realize they're not supposed to talk to me, because I think in a lot of ways we've made reference checks almost worthless. And you know what, even better, that's where your network becomes so important, is vetting these people. That's where the internet helps, vetting these people, because there are a lot of things that makes this difficult. And I think your skill in getting the best scoop you can get is valuable. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. Very good information.
So there you go. Who else do you call? The college, previous schools, employers. And again, as I said earlier, it can depend on their age. They may not have much of a work history, so you're going to have to go off the interview and just go with your gut sometimes. Okay. First contact. So we have our list. We've gone through all of our applications. We've selected the ones we're going to interview, and now it's time to make first contact. General inquiry. When I call someone or when I have someone call someone, first thing we ask, hey, this is Danny Levitt from Region 5. Really excited that you chose to apply for our job. Are you still available and are you interested? And just right off the bat, I think that's setting a tone. One of the things I wanted to talk a lot about today is, again, traditionally, I think organizations who make this whole process stiff and formal think you're doing yourself a disadvantage. I think the moment I start making contact with an applicant, it's going to be all about making that applicant excited to come to work for Region 5. I'm going to do everything I can to make them feel like they're desired, like, they're flattered. We're flattered that they applied. So notice how I said that very first thing. When I call, I'm just going to say, really excited you applied for our job. Are you still available and are you still interested? Because right away, that's setting up the expectation that I think you're an awesome candidate and I hope you're still available. So maybe we can talk about an interview. Ask any questions that came up during your reference check. If this is someone that you're kind of not sure about, you can approach that with, yes, I got your resume. I called a couple of references, just wanted to ask you a couple of questions. And it's rare that anything like that would preclude an interview, but if appropriate, you could certainly do that. And then it's time to schedule that interview. Should it be your convenience or theirs? You guys, if you're buying into what I'm selling about, we need to make this easy, I think you need to have lots of interview slots available. And I think you need to let people pick to the best of your ability so it is for their convenience when they come interview with you. Because again, we're trying to hire superstars here. Superstars are usually hard workers in the job they're at. They're usually busy, and you could lose a good candidate by being very rigid and, well, you can come at this time, and if not, sorry. So I like to have multiple interview times and dates available. And then the etiquette, see that second bullet? The etiquette for us is we call the person farthest away first. So let's say we have 6 applicants. 5 of them are from outside our town or our organization and 1 internal. If we have 6 applicants, I'm going to have 7 or 8 interview slots available. I'm going to start with the person farthest away, and I'm going to work back to my internal candidate. My internal candidate will get the last selection, but notice what I said earlier. If there's 6 applicants, I'm going to have 8 slots. So even though my internal candidate chooses last, they should still have 2 or 3 slots to choose from. Make sure if people are traveling, you give them your exact address. If you're in a weird place that a GPS or Waze or something like that doesn't bring people right to your door, make sure they have the directions to get to you as easily as possible. If there's going to be traffic issues that are specific to a time of day, let them know. Again, what's my theme here? Let's make this as easy as possible and make these candidates feel desired and catered to as we are courting them to come apply and perhaps get a job with our organization. By the way, this may never come up for you, but it comes up for us because superintendent searches by law are confidential. The media, sometimes we get superintendent searches where the local media is intensely interested in who's going to be the next superintendent of schools. And we can have some real fun playing Dodge the Reporter as we bring these people in to interview. So just if that is something, be cognizant of it and prepare for it in advance. Next slide. So now we're preparing for the interview. Here's some questions you need to know ahead of time. Is it going to be you as an individual or is it going to be a committee? Again, I've been doing this a long time. I'm an old person. There was a time when I thought it needed to be me. I will tell you at 62 years old, coming up on 40 years in education, I like committees now. And I think you got to be very specific about how you form and train the interview committee. But I think there's value in having a committee in on the hiring process. I also think for any important position, I think it takes 2 interviews to get hired. We'll talk more about that in a moment. What about the executive director or superintendent or the highest person in your organization? At what level should they be involved? It depends on your organization. At Region 5, I sit in on every second interview. No one gets hired at my organization without me being in on the second interview. But honestly, I'm like most of you, I don't have time to be in on all of those first interviews. But again, that depends on the size of your organization to a great extent. Remember earlier, I told you we'd come back and talk about that ideal employee profile. I think once you've formed your interview committee, I think the first thing you do is give everybody on that committee a copy of the ideal employee profile. Remember the value of that I said earlier. When I give them a copy of the ideal employee profile, what that does is that tells everyone on that committee, here's what we're looking for. One of the first things we got to fight in an interview committee is everybody coming in thinking we're looking for something else. When we provide them a copy of that ideal employee profile, it refreshes everybody's mind about, oh yeah, this is what we're looking for in terms of skills, personality, teamwork, all of those kind of things. And the other reason this is effective that I said earlier, who develops the ideal employee profile for every department in my organization? The people in that department, the director and the people that work in that department. It's their ideal employee profile. It's incredibly helpful for 2 things. Number 1, to make sure we're all looking for the same thing. And number 2, it guides our writing of questions for the interview. So I'm jumping ahead. I'm sure I've got this in here in a moment, but I'm going to go ahead and say it now. If you're using canned interview questions and you're asking the same questions of applicants in multiple departments, I think you should stop. I think you're wasting your time. You're not being specific enough. I think every job requires different interview questions. Certainly every departmental job. What I mean by that, my curriculum department is going to ask different interview questions than my special ed department. And those interview questions in each department are going to be developed depending on the ideal employee profile for that department. Being very specific. And I know organizations that are pretty large and they give canned interview questions, the same questions to every department. They don't give the committee any input on those questions. I've even been on a committee where I not only had no input on the question, I was given, you're going to ask these 2 questions. And oh, by the way, here's the correct answer the candidate should give. I mean, seriously, that's insane in my opinion. So ideal employee profile, strengths and weaknesses we're looking for, helps us write our interview questions, helps everybody on the committee to know what we're looking and remind them exactly what we're looking for. How long do we need? It depends, but you should know, but depending on the number of questions you have, you need to know pretty much how long it should take. And this is a great tip here. Let the candidate know when they sit down, or even when you invite them to the interview, here's how many questions we're going to have. We're going to have a clock where you can see it. And we want you to listen to how I say this. We want you to help us get through this interview in 60 minutes or less, or 90 minutes or less, or 30, whatever. Let the candidate know ahead of time how many questions we have, how much time they have, and put a clock where they can see it. This is so important to make this a streamlined process. And again, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. Tell them, we have this many questions. We're really looking forward to the interview, but we want you to help us get through these questions in this amount of time. What about overtime? I think you always leave 15 minutes between. If you're interviewing multiple people in the same day, leave at least 15 minutes in between interviews. That gives 3 things probably. If we do need to go over because something came up, that gives us a little bit of time. If we need overtime for our current interview, that also gives time to write notes after each interview for the committee, which is vital in my opinion. And if anybody needs a quick break to grab something to drink or go to the restroom, it allows for that too. So I think a minimum of 15 minutes between interviews. And then I said I'd come back to preparing the questions. I already told you my opinion versus canned interview questions versus unique. I think you always need to take the time to write unique interview questions for each position, make them fit your organization and employee profile. Don't have preconceived notions about answers. I don't have time to tell a bunch of stories today, but I got to tell you this one because it's too good. Remember, I said I was on the worst interview committee ever, where they not only gave us the questions and we couldn't adapt them, but it also told us the correct answer. So one of the questions I had was, on a scale of 1 to 10, rate yourself in terms of honesty. And then all of the questions on this committee had the proper answer under, but of all of them, this was the only one that was all caps and all bold. And it said underneath that question, the only acceptable answer is a 10. We actually interviewed 17 people for this position. 16 people, when I asked them that question, did, oh gosh, oh man, that's a great question. You know, I guess I'd have to say I'm a 10. And every time they did that, when the interview was over, I was just like going, oh, make me gag, because you know what? Nobody's a 10. One person, when I asked them that question, that person kind of sat back in their chair and they laughed. They said, wow, that's a pretty neat question. He said, I don't know. I guess I'm a 9. Everybody tells a white lie now and then. And when his interview was over, the minute the door closed, I looked at the rest of the committee. I said, that's the only honest person we've interviewed all day. We ended up hiring, guess who? Absolutely, the guy that said that, and he was an incredible employee. So my message there is, don't have preconceived notions about answers. You never know what someone's going to say. And I just think the whole idea of, here's the question, there's only one way to answer it, that's just crazy. So I'll try not to tell any more stories, but that one's just too good not to tell. Open-ended, absolutely. No interview question should be yes or no. I mean, it needs to be open-ended. It needs to let them talk. Yes or no questions do nothing for you. And then have someone, if you're doing it by yourself, you're not doing it with the committee, be sure someone reviews your questions before you go into that interview. All right, let's talk a little more about the preparation for the interview. And what should they know? Well, people coming in the age of the internet, anybody interviewing for a position in your organization should know quite a bit about your organization. And if they don't, you know, why would you want them anyway? They haven't done any research. They obviously don't care enough to have looked into the place, you know, they're coming in to interview at. And I'll tell you this, the first thing, well, one of the first 3 things we ask everybody is, number 1, what makes you want to work at Region 5? And number 2, what do you think we do here? But whether you ask that specifically or not, I promise you, if they don't come into the interview knowing some pretty specific stuff about your organization, they haven't cared enough, or they're not serious enough, they're not smart enough in the age of the internet to actually Google you or go in and learn some things about the place they're applying for. Are they up to date on current trends? Whatever your organization is, I think you need to find out, are these people lifelong learners? Are they stuck in the past, or are they on the cutting edge? Are you hiring truly a superstar? Again, your organization's data, there's something online about everybody out there, so they should know that. Knowledge of your community, right? Special knowledge or skills in the area of the job they're applying for. And I said people skills if appropriate. There are not many skills out there nowadays where that's not appropriate, but there are a few. If you've got someone locked in an office all day just entering data, maybe they don't. Maybe people skills isn't a make or break for you, but you know what? I think every organization is a team, and I think teams thrive when everybody has some people skills. So that's just my opinion. And then that last one, customer service. Again, most of the times that's going to be important, but notice those next ones. Adaptability, multitasking, time management. We ask specific questions. Brenda has set in on second interviews with me. We ask all of these things, and we tell them that all of these things are important if you're going to work here and you're going to be happy and be a great employee for Region 5. Olga, anything coming up? I see a few more things have popped into the chat. Oh, and before you do that, I think this last one's incredibly important. Why do you want to work here? Not why do you want to work in Beaumont, Texas? Not why do you want to be a teacher or a principal? Why do you want to work at Region 5 ESC versus anywhere else on earth? I think we should ask that every time. And if they can't give you an answer, honestly, if they don't find a way to say that, even if you didn't ask them, I think it's kind of a red flag. So Olga, I'm going to pause and take a drink. Anything else in the chat?
Yes, we just had a comment come in from Brenda, and she says, we always include 2 or 3 adult ed scenarios with questions during our interview with potential instructors and coordinators.
Yes, and I'll tell you this, for most, she's exactly right. And for most, and I'm trying not to be too Region 5 specific, but we actually have people do presentations. Most of our people have to stand and deliver in front of an audience. So I would say for 80% of the interviews we do, they're going to also be required to do a presentation as part of their interview, because that's what a lot of our people do. Obviously, we're not going to do that with a custodian or someone that's just working on computers. But yes, I think Brenda's example is perfect. If they're going to be doing something in your organization and you want to know that they're great at it, why wouldn't you include that as part of the interview? Awesome. So what else? Anything else that you think is vital that you do in your organization to get prepared to have a great interview?
So Brenda says that their potential AEL staff at ESC 5 do too.
Exactly.
And then Joan says, what is an acceptable reason for wanting to come to an organization, or what's a red flag?
I can tell you Brenda's laughing right now, because what we hear all the time, and it's intentional, you guys, we've done some stuff over the years. It's a different workshop topic, but we've done a lot of things over the year to make Region 5 a great place to work. Most of the time, what we hear is, I know someone who works here, or I've talked to someone who worked here, and I want to come here because they say it's the best place to work. And I'm not trying to be cocky when I say that. That's something very intentional that we've done. And I think Brenda's going to type in the chat, yep, that's absolutely true. Red flags. It's a red flag to me if they tell me I'm coming here to make more money. It just absolutely is. And it surprises me sometimes that people will actually say that. If they say it a little tongue in cheek, I'm okay with that. It's a semi-red flag depending on how they say it. If they tell me they want a promotion, I'm okay if they look at coming to work at Region 5 is bettering themselves, or it's a professional goal. If someone tells me I want a promotion, that's different from someone looking at me and say, this is my dream job and I've always wanted to work here and I feel like it's the next step in my career. So red flag is not just, as I said earlier, it's not what they say as much as how they say it. So yeah, I think if they're moving just for salary, if they're moving just because they want a promotion, that could be a red flag. If they're moving because it's their dream job and they're honored to have a chance to go to the next level, that's a whole different meaning to me than saying they want a quote unquote promotion. Great question.
Yes. And so Brenda says, yes, she hears that all the time. And then Dr. Frankie Johnson says, we have the applicant demonstrate a 10 to 15 minute lesson at the start of the interview. They're told in advance to prepare to teach a lesson. And then Joan says, awesome. Thank you. Very helpful information. That
is wonderful. And by the way, she made a great point that I should have made. I would never spring that on them. Remember, we're all about letting them be prepared and letting them know what they're in for. So absolutely appropriate. She said, you definitely let them know ahead of time, if you're going to have them do a presentation, what the expectations are. Great. All right, so let's talk about what to look for here. We're going into the interview. We're training our committee. What do we train our committee to look for in the candidate? So the candidate has one chance to make a first impression. I would prep my committee just to say this, you know what? If they're winging it, if they're mailing it in, if they're coming to the interview and they're not well groomed, they don't value this enough for me to value them. So that's a definite turnoff. Bling, and I know I'm old, but when it comes to those next two, bling, tattoos, piercings, all those other stuff, I think you have to look at it as this person, number one, is going to represent us. I am hiring an ambassador of Region 5. Do they live up to our expectations? And yes, we still have things about grooming in our policies and procedures. And I'm also looking for judgment here on the candidate's part. You know, you're coming to do an education job, you're coming to whatever part of the state, what the norms are. Trying not to go too old school on y'all here, but we tell our committee grooming, you know, the amount of jewelry, bling, tattoos, piercings, all that stuff, it all weighs into what we're looking for. Because again, they should understand that this is their chance to make a first impression on us. Do they fit our organization and community? You know, it doesn't do Region 5 any good if I hire somebody who I send them out to our schools and our schools are like, yeah, don't need them again. So you got to keep in mind, these people should be ambassadors for your organization. So that first impression is part of what kind of an ambassador will they be when they go out to work on our behalf. And then language, vocabulary, preparation, all of these things should make an impact. In a formal interview, they should speak the language of the position they're applying for. So if it's an education position, their language should reflect that. Their vocabulary should reflect that. We should be able to tell early on in the interview, have they prepared and did they come in ready to go? What other things about them? They should be punctual. I mean, time, you know, being late for an interview, not good. We've done our part, right? Remember what I said earlier? We've given them directions. We've told them what to expect in terms of traffic. We're trying to keep our interviews on schedule. So someone showing up for an interview late without a reason, that's a big red flag. Rested and personable. I mean, you know, people can be nervous and you got to take that into consideration. I'm going to tell my last story will be about that later on, but I think they need to be all of these 3 P's right here: punctual, or PRP, punctual, rested, and personable. Professional, but relaxed. And when I go to our side of this, I'm going to talk about us putting them at ease, because they may come in, especially if they really want this job, they may come in kind of tight, kind of tense. We want them to be professional, but we want to help the candidate to be relaxed. Good posture, eye contact, active listeners, all of these are things just to go over with your committee, that these are all things we're looking for in a great superstar employee. And then what do they do when we ask them a question? Do they blurt? Do they panic? I always, when I'm coaching this on the other side, I always tell people, listen, pause, respond. So they should understand the question, organize their thoughts, and then answer. A lot of people are going to us. They're going to, you know, have those personal idiosyncrasies. Not definite. That's not actually a deal breaker. But if they're a really high level professional employee, they should have been practicing some of this, and they should be ready to come in and present themselves well. Okay. So I see a couple of things. Olga, anything on that side? Any comments on what we should do or what they should do or what we should be looking for in the candidate?
Not yet,
Okay.
but just we're encouraging you to please post your comments, questions, anything in the chat. Thank you.
Perfect. So let's talk about you and your committee. How should you present yourself during the interview? Again, this is something I don't know if we talk about enough with our committees. So, as I said just a moment ago, our job is to put the candidate at ease so we can see them for who they really are. I tell candidates sometimes when I'm doing this workshop the other way, I'll say, you know what? They're going to hire you for who you appear to be, but they're going to fire you for who you really are. And what I mean by that is I tell candidates, when you're going into an interview, be you. It's funny. I'll post a superintendent search, and I have wonderful female applicants too. But a question I always get from the guys is, well, Danny, should I wear my boots to the interview? And my question, we are in Texas, and my answer is always the same thing. Are you going to wear boots on the job? If the answer is yes, wear boots to your interview. What's my message there? We want them to be who they are so we can see if they're truly a fit for our job. So I think with the interview committee, that's a lot of our responsibility to put the candidate at ease so we can see who they really are. I almost always start every interview very generally with basically just tell the committee about yourself. A lot of times this will answer questions that come up later. And when we get those questions, we'll just say, you already answered this, and we'll move on. I think it's efficient. You may even have to say something like, in just the next 3 minutes, tell us about yourself or your professional background. Have your questions, your interview questions in a logical sequence. I don't like to see a committee, each person ask one question and then move around. I like for a committee to, each person on the committee ask 2 or 3 questions or group the questions logically. That way the candidate doesn't look like they're watching a tennis match as they're sitting there wondering who the next question is coming from. This is a big deal. You're going to have some really nice people on your committee. Make sure you tell those people ahead of time, don't help them answer. They're going to flounder every now and then on a question. Just be patient, just be polite, have a pleasant look on your face, and let the candidate get to the answer. If they can't get to the answer, we need to know that, but don't answer the question for them. It's amazing how often I see this, and it's one more reason as I've gotten older, I think it's more important you train your committee, because a lot of times you'll say, well, the question is blah, 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 and the candidate hesitates for a moment, and you got people in the committee trying to help them. Don't help them. Let them answer. One more reason why you ask open-ended questions. And absolutely, if their answer doesn't give you everything you need, don't hesitate to say, could you elaborate on that? Could you talk a little more about this part of your answer? Get the information you want on the questions you ask. Don't rush them, and everybody on the committee should be taking notes of one form or another. What else about you? Remember, this interview is about them, not about you. Now, especially the first interview. Brenda's probably laughing again, because our second interviews is usually, if it's a 30-minute interview, it's the candidate talking for 10 minutes and me talking for 20 about the expectations of working at Region 5. But particularly in the first interview, make sure the candidate is doing most of the talking, because that first interview in particular, it's about them, it's not about you. Now, they should have already had the background on you. They should have already done the research. And there are going to be some things you're going to tell them, but the majority of the interview should be about them. Wrapping the interview up, show some etiquette. What do I mean by that? I don't understand people that don't do this, but a lot of people don't do it. As you're wrapping the interview up, don't make them ask. Tell them what your timeline is. If they're a superstar, you're not the only people that want them. So the more polite you are and the better you treat them, the more they're going to think about you when they make their decision. So tell them your timeline, how many more interviews we have. We hope to be through by a week from Friday. We will call everyone at that time. Don't leave them hanging because they're wondering, when am I going to get a call? Did I do great? Did I do terrible? Make this thing candidate friendly. Tell them ahead of time the start date, contract days. And here's another one. I've never understood why anyone would have the salary be some kind of secret. I'm okay if they know the salary range is going to be X to Y. I like it even better when they know what the salary is going to be. Make sure they know some things about the community. Talk to them a moment as you wrap up the interview about housing in the area. Do they have baggage? Give them the opportunity. Remember, there are things you can ask and things you can't ask. You might find out something when you Google them that bothers you, but you can't really ask them about it. So one of the questions I love that we ask people nowadays is, you know, in the age of Google and Facebook and all of those types of things, is there anything you'd like to tell us about yourself that may show up on a background check? Now, it's an absolutely legal question. They can answer it or not, but you're giving them the opportunity. If there's something out there they are worried about, you're giving them the opportunity to tell you about that ahead of time. Perfect example. I had a lady tell me one time, I had a DUI on New Year's Eve in 1981. And I just want to put that out there ahead of time. That's going to show up. Never happened before, never happened since, but I just wanted you to know that. That's almost becomes a positive. They're open, they're honest, and I'm talking about something that happened 30 years ago. So there you go. What questions do they have? Always ask the candidate what questions they have of you. Again, I don't understand when people don't do that. And then sell your organization to them. You're trying to hire a superstar. Again, I can't say this enough. You're often not a superstar's only opportunity to move. So sell your organization, sell your school, sell your faculty, sell your community, sell your kids. Make them think that your organization and your community is where they want to live. Be honest and absolutely, just like we want to see the real them, let them make sure your committee lets the candidates see the real you. If you work in a great organization, you want them to see how good your people are. Wow, we've interviewed everybody and we've actually made an offer. Don't drag out that process. The waiting game. Don't make people wait. Again, if they're superstars, somebody else is going to hire them, but it's just good etiquette. Let them know the timeline of your process and then move on with that process once you've completed all the interviews. What if they receive another offer? Well, if they're a superstar, I'm going to ask them what that offer was, and are you going to give me a chance to beat it? What if you're going to interview 10 people over 2 weeks and you're absolutely convinced after the first interview that this is your rock star and this is who you want? What do? I don't know that it's proper to call 9 people that you've already scheduled an interview with and cancel it, but I think it's absolutely proper to tell that person after the interview, listen, I got to tell you, you blew our committee away. We are really excited. Just want you to know, we've got some other people to interview, but here's our timeline. And if anything else comes up, I want you to call me, because I'm not going to cancel 9 interviews. That wouldn't be proper. I wouldn't do that to you. I'm not going to do it to others, but you really impressed me, and I hope you'll stay in touch, and we're going to get back to you as soon as this process is over. So again, everything you can do, if you find a superstar, try and get that superstar hired. If you do have to change your timeline for any reason, let everybody you interviewed know why that the timeline changed, and if appropriate, why it changed. The golden rule for executive and principals, honestly, is don't settle. Do everything in this process with the idea in mind that we're searching for superstars, and don't settle. If you go through all this process and you haven't found that person that makes your organization better, don't hire, repost, hire a sub, whatever you need to do to get by, and go again. If who you hire is the most important thing you do, don't settle.
If we realize that a candidate misunderstood a question, should we stop them and repeat the question?
Absolutely.
Okay. And then Brenda says, don't settle is absolutely the best advice. And then Joan says, that's so good. Don't settle. Thank you.
Very good. And your first question reminded me of something else. Again, it's one of those HR myths I've heard my whole life. We have to ask every candidate the exact same questions. Show me that law. Again, now I'm not saying we ask every candidate different questions, but I'm saying a candidate's answer to a question may lead to someone on the committee having a unique follow-up because of what they said. There's nothing wrong with that. So, you know, if they say something that you need an elaboration on, just like the person or they misunderstood, it's absolutely okay for the committee to ask follow-ups that it pertain to something the candidate brought up in their answer. The other thing that I'll defend until someone shows me the law, we often have a couple of unique questions for internal candidates versus external. Again, I've not seen a law that forbids that. And sometimes internal candidates, you just have a couple of unique questions for them. So that old thing about you can only ask every candidate the exact same questions, to a point. So jumping in here. So immediately after every interview, sit down and list the candidate's strengths and weaknesses. If you're interviewing 10 people, or like the committee I was on years ago where we interviewed 17, that was crazy. But by the time you get to the end, if you haven't taken notes, you're going to forget. And make no mistake, you're going to lean towards the people that interview last. That old thing about you want to be first or last. Oh, no, 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 no. You want to go last when you're interviewing or as close to the end as you can. But having said that, take notes, and in your notes, jot down something about them unique, like the guy in the purple tie or the lady with the gorgeous earrings, or whatever you're doing. Write down something unique. So when your committee goes back and looks at that person, it's like, oh yeah, that guy. It wasn't that guy. It was like, oh, I remember him. There was something unique. So in your notes, take notes and do something unique so you remember who you're talking about. Make the decision when it's all over. Don't drag the process out. This is another advantage to checking references ahead of time, by the way. But make the decision and call your top choice immediately, but do not call anybody else. And if we had more time, I'd say, why don't we call anybody else? But I'll go ahead and tell you the answer. What if your top choice doesn't take the job? I know people who have offered the job to someone and then called everybody else and told them they weren't selected. And now the person you offered to turns you down because they're awesome. And when they told their board president, the school offered them more money and they stayed. And now you got to call someone on your list who you already said wasn't your top choice and offer them the job. So never call everyone else until the person you offer the job to has accepted the job. And by the way, let's say you were fortunate enough that you had 4 or 5 superstars go through that process and you can only hire one. You see the next bullet there. If you don't hire them this time, do not burn any bridges. I can tell you there are 2 or 3 people that work at Region 5 right now that did not get the first job they applied for with us. But when their interview was over, I or the director called them and said, listen, you didn't get this job, but you impressed us so much. If you see anything else open here, we would love to have you apply again. You're our kind of person, and we think you're a rock star. And we have at least 2 or 3 people working for us right now because of the way we handle that situation. I'm going real quick through this. Length of contract, if any, make sure they know that ahead of time. Probationary or term. I think there's some value, and I'm not just talking about school districts where they have to be on a probationary contract for a couple of years. I'm talking about there's some value in your organization to hiring people with a 90-day window. And yes, that is legal if you let them know ahead of time and if you have policies that let you do that. So probationary periods, I'm a big fan of. Yeah, it just is what it is. Some organizations can do it, some can't. I already gave you my thoughts about salary. Be open about that. I do think it's time to get creative to the best of your ability about incentives and benefits. Some of them are fiscal or material in nature, like those first 2, but there are other things you can do. Have some things to make them happy. Look at this. How about a welcome packet? When you're offering someone a job, email them a welcome packet. What should be in that welcome packet? A list of social events, recreational opportunities. If they've got kids, here's, they're going to know the best schools in the area, but here's some summer camps. Here's a great youth group. Here's all the things about our area that will make not only you be happy, but your family want to come here. There you go. List of camps, youth leagues, youth events, swimming pools, kids stuff. Get those, make those great families want to come work for your organization. And then just a list of churches, civic organizations, club, etc. One thing about hiring a superstar is if you can make their spouse think this is the best place they could ever work, now you've got someone else on your side helping them to make the decision you want. So all of these things I would include when I made the job offer, because all of these things are the kind of things that help us hire a superstar. I'm going to go through to the end and then I'll ask for questions. So I told you I had one more story to tell real quickly. Let me check my time. Okay, I'm going fast. Interview versus body of work. I think interview is critical. But I also think their history and their work is very important too. And I'm thinking of a specific example, and I promise you, you're going to think I'm making this up, but I am not exaggerating. I asked a person one time to apply for a job, and I knew the person's work history. I didn't know them personally, but I knew everywhere they'd been, they'd just been a rock star. And when I called them and said, hey, we've got an opening, I wish you'd think about applying, they actually said, I would. I'd love to apply. I think I will, but I just want you to know ahead of time, I'm a terrible interview. And I laughed because I knew their history. I'm like, oh, you're funny. You're fine. You're going to be awesome. We're going to be relaxed. You're going to be relaxed. And they said, oh, okay, no, I'm going to apply, but I just want you to know ahead of time. It's like a phobia. I'm like a terrible interview. And we laughed and they hung up. And so we interviewed them. And guess what? Oh my gosh, they were awful. I mean, they were panicked. And I mean, even said 1 minute into the interview, she looked around at the committee and most of us knew her. And she said, you guys, I told Danny before I applied, I am terrified of interviews. So I just want y'all to know ahead of time. And sure enough, we all laughed and we went through the process and it was painful. So when it was over, we were all talking and I said, well, she said she was, and I know this about her work history. And they said, well, let's call a couple other references. And two of the references that we called actually laughed and said, hey, did you interview her? And we said, yeah. And they said, it was awful, wasn't it? I'm like, oh my gosh. And so it's a hilarious story, but it's absolutely true and something you all need to think about. We hired this person and they were absolutely wonderful. So just be aware, it's not all about the interview. It's not all about the references. It's not all about their history. You got to take all of it into account if you want to hire great people. Be careful about hiring family or friends. I mean, if you're going to hire, I don't know. I've never hired family. I just never have. I've only hired one or two friends in my whole career. And both of them, when they applied, I said, I just want you to know you're going to have to be head and shoulders above everybody else or I can't hire you. So I think everybody needs to be aware. You got to think about before you hire family and friends. And then more than ever before, I think you can tell from my whole presentation, I'm all about we're selling us to them as much as they're selling themselves to us. There's a shortage out there in my world. There's a huge shortage. I don't know about yours, but I think there's a shortage of good, great employees overall. So make sure you're selling yourself. Final thoughts. I really believe this. There is nothing you can do. There's no training you can give the people that work for you. There's no curriculum you can teach, materials you can buy. There's nothing you can do to overcome the influence of one bad employee. I think the most important thing you do, I'm going back to the very first slide of the day. After your 6 months, first 6 months on the job, nothing you ever do will be more important than who you hire. And if your organization isn't getting better the longer you're there as the leader, then you're probably not hiring the right people. My second bullet there, what do I mean when I say no war was ever won from the air? Your organization is not going to be defined by you, the leader. You're up here. And you're not going to define your organization. Your organization will be defined by the frontline workers. In my world, if I'm a school superintendent, our school succeeds or fails based on the teachers in front of the kids. That's also true at Region 5. Region 5 is as good or as bad as our frontline workers interfacing with the school districts we work for. It's not about me. It's always about them. And if that's true, then I've got to hire the best people I can hire. So in education and in business, it's all about the frontline workers. Whew. Olga, I am 5 minutes inside my timeline, which gives us time for some really good questions.
You sure are.
What do we have?
So one comment, and that was mine. Don't tell your second choice. When you talked about second choice, don't tell them that they were your second choice.
Ever.
And some organizations made that mistake.
Yeah.
And then Brenda said that Region 5 has excellent non-financial benefits. That's awesome. And then one of the organizations where I work went strictly based off of the interview.
Yeah.
So it didn't matter if they know you and you're going to be awesome. If you did not do well on that interview, you don't get the job. And that's just unfortunate.
I would flip the coin on that. I would say, you know what? There's a lot of good used car salesmen out there, but I would rather have an honest used car salesman that wasn't that slick than a really slick talking shyster. So yeah, I get it. But again, I think you doing your homework, I'm telling you, that person I used in my story about how bad they interviewed, one of the best employees we've ever had. If I said her name, and I'm not going to, Brenda would go, oh my gosh, she was awesome. And then Brenda would go, really? She's a bad interview? you would never have guessed. And it was just a unique quirk to her personality. She was just terrified of interviews. And if we had only gone by the interview, I promise you, we would have hired someone that wasn't as good.
Exactly. I think that's a good point. Danny, you have to, I guess, kind of know when somebody is not being authentic.
And that's where reference checks you can trust. That's, again, a lot of used car salesmen out there. That's one reason I don't trust reference letters. And that's one reason I call at least one or two people that wasn't on their reference list, because I've got to find someone to put me at ease that smooth talking superstar in the interview is actually a smooth talking superstar on the job. So going back and looking at their work history, talking to people in the organization they're coming from, all of those I think are critical.
Very good. And also we have some questions coming in. How do you feel about a person that has negative things to say about their current job?
Absolute red flag. When I do workshops for candidates, I tell them, you tell me one negative thing about where you want, I just unhired you. You will not get hired. Because if they'll badmouth the people they work for now, they'll badmouth me. And you know what, you guys, we are in Texas and I am old. I believe you got to ride for the brand. I have worked for places and people I didn't care about, but I would never dream of saying that in an interview. As long as they're paying my paycheck, I'm going to be loyal to them. And when I leave there, I'm not going to bash them to a prospective employer. There is no upside to that, in my opinion. Can you tell I'm a little passionate about that, Olga?
Definitely. And thank you for sharing that. So we have some comments coming through. No, not a question, but this was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for all of the information. It will truly be helpful. And then Sophia says this was very helpful. Aaron says, love the presentation. Thank you. So excited to interview people in the future now.
And Brenda, I think would reflect this. You guys, we love interviewing. I mean, I enjoy interviewing. And I think that comes across. And one last thing, remember, that's why it's so important to prep your committee. When Brenda said a lot of non-material benefits to working at Region 5, the best part of working at Region 5 is you get to work with some really fun people. Why wouldn't you prep your committee to exude that during the interview? I mean, again, if they're a superstar, they're going to be interviewing at 3 or 4 places, and we're all probably going to pay somewhere in the same pay range. If they leave my interview thinking, these are the coolest people, I want to work with these people every day, that may very well be the deciding factor on them choosing us over someone else.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Cheryl says, do you have any suggestions for when you are placed on a committee unexpectedly?
Just ask questions ahead of time, ask permission to modify the questions. I would not presume to put anybody on a committee and not give them any input on what we're doing. I think that's offensive to your own employees. I know how I felt when I was put on a committee like that. As I said earlier, I had no input on the questions, and the questions told me what the right answer was supposed to be. I think you're offending your own people and you're showing a lack of confidence in them. If I'm going to ask somebody to give up their time to be on a committee, I'm going to give them some input on what we're doing.
Thank you so much. And then Beth says, thank you, Dr. Levitt. This was great. Charlotte says, thank you. Very helpful information. So thank you, everybody, for attending today. And don't forget to complete the evaluation in your transcripts. And Beth has placed the link to get to the PD portal where you will log in and complete that evaluation. So thank you so much, Dr. Levitt, for taking the time from your conference. And so glad
at the beautiful Kalahari Resort in Round Rock.
Yes,
Texas.
the Kalahari Resort. So thank Kalahari for the